Hey there, welcome back to the Business That Matters Spotlight. It's Warren Coughlin here, your ever-loving host. Today's going to be a really interesting conversation, and there's really at least one very important lesson, I think, to be learned from this. You can take pretty much any technical skill or service and focus it in a way that produces amazing impacts while producing a healthy profit. And when I say technical skills, I don't mean they're easy. They often require a high level of sophistication and expertise, which can lead some to think that they can only be successful by offering them to large companies or large budgets, that kind of thing. Today's guest has taken the creative skills associated with video production, storytelling, even branding, and laser focused their application to help NGOs, nonprofits, social entrepreneurs advance really important social causes. And by doing so, he enables those organizations to have greater impact. He's coined a term, which I think is just awesome, which is human-centered production. Paul Lynch is the founder of Cage Free Productions. So Paul, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. Excited.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Listen, what I always do at the beginning of these is because, not everybody can hang out for a full podcast. So I always like to make sure people get some value right off the get-go. So if you could give one piece of advice for an entrepreneur who, wants to make a difference, but maybe is worried about choosing that kind of focus, or that narrow a focus, what would it be?
I think to really focus on what your purpose is and to be authentic about it. Distilling it down to that one core thing that you want to achieve in the world, I think is the whole point. So I would say focus on that first and then let things follow in line. And so it's sort of decentering yourself and your own ambitions or egos, but it's really trying to center purpose. And then from that, figure out how can you be the biggest champion of that purpose. And it might not be entrepreneurship. It might be building a team or practicing entrepreneurship where you already are. Right. But if you center the purpose, I think a lot will fall into place after that.
Now that presumes that people know their purpose. Was yours always clear and apparent, or did you have to struggle with it? I know a lot of people, I've played the purpose game with them, and it's sometimes a fairly drawn out exercise because they've never pondered it.
Yeah, and I don't think it's static either. I think I was really fortunate from a young age to be requested to find purpose. There's a lot of other stories around it, but from a young age, I had my near-death experience when I was 4. And from that moment on, my formative years were under the framework that this was all a second chance. So do something with it. And
that's interesting. You and I have a similar, my near-death experience was at birth. I was the second person in history to live through a congenital defect. And I had the same sort of, what am I going to do with this gift?
Wow. Yeah, mine was, I was the first person to survive a rare form of hepatitis. So I was in a coma and all this kind of stuff. But it was so formative because I was around 4, and then, everything after that was do something with it. And also this notion of carpe diem, but not just to do whatever with it. This was a gift. So find something. And so I think that purpose conversation is something that's always going to evolve. And sometimes the purpose that you may have with yourself 10 years ago or 5 years in the future, they might be very different. A lot of times I try to think about having conversations with myself at 5-year intervals. So what would 15-year-old, 20, 25, I won't keep going to all the different years of increments of 5, but what would a dinner conversation look like? And if you center it on something like this of purpose, who would be a sellout? Who would be true to the purpose? And what would the different me's in these different epics and eras of my life, what would there be content of that purpose?
And was there a continuity for you? Like, I know for me, when I had that realization that I had this gift, I've got this really weird circuitous background. And that's why. I mean, I thought I was going to be a lawyer so that I could go into politics. And then I didn't like politics. So then I went into arts, and then I went into academia. And then I found entrepreneurship. And I thought, oh, this is it. This is where, there's a creative exercise that really makes the world a better place. So it took me like a number of iterations to get there. Was that yours, or did you have a pretty clear sense of the impact you wanted?
Yeah, I think from a young age, it was, what are jobs or things that you've seen that help people? And there was always this audacity and arrogance of that I could do something that was going to positively impact the world. And I think you need a certain amount of that. And that is tempered, I think, over time with me. But the other side is that I think the continuity is to help someone. But at a young age, it was, a doctor, they help people, and it evolved over time. And I think that similar to you, as I went through winding paths, but if you look in hindsight, it seems more like a straight line or a nice windy paved road. But as I was navigating it, it wasn't, this is North Star and we're going this direction. You paths always look clearer in reverse. Yeah.
So let's get into the business. Before I go into your background, so what actually is Cage Free? What do you do? Who do you do it for? How do you do it?
Yeah, so we're a storytelling agency, and we specialize in video. About a quarter of our work grew out of the need for ancillary services around video production. We only focus in the social impact space, and there was a lot of organizations that were doing amazing work and were having a hard time telling their story or articulating their mission. And in order to make video or any storytelling effective, is you have to spend some time to figure out why you're communicating, why story, why video. And we started building that into everything we do. And so that sort of quarter part of our business is a fractional chief storytelling officer role. And that can be in an ongoing fashion or every piece of content that we create. And the idea is that you have to identify not only why are you telling the story, but centering that purpose again is, what is it that you're trying to achieve? And what are the stories that are going to help you build a social movement around that? And so we spend a lot of time on that deep listening experience, really. It's the flip side of the storytelling coin is listening. And we hold that space in between the community that someone is trying to serve, their product and service, their internal team, and their marketing, and in that, storytelling is this unique tool that can be the connective tissue between these different arenas. And then once you can take these disparate passions and turn that into collective purpose, you can start to figure out what are the stories that need to be told of your impact or your need for education or advocacy, depending on the nature of your organization or your initiative. And then from that, you can tell stories externally. And then we have a full in-house production house to be able to do that.
People can understand that a bit, like more concretely, like a chief, a fractional chief storytelling officer is not a traditional C-suite position. So what would that actually, can you give an example or a story what this fractional storytelling officer has done and how that led to an outcome? Like, I think it's a really interesting model, but I imagine people are sitting here going, well, what does that actually mean? How does that work?
So sometimes organizations will come to us. For instance, we're working with a foundation that's sunsetting. And so they have all this history. And, what are the successes along the way? What are the failures? And so they came to us saying, we're a few years out from finishing this initiative that we've been on for 20 years. And we want to have our experiences help the community. So we start digging into, okay, what did you learn? What are the different stories? And in many ways, it's being a soundboard for them to help them start to narrow and articulate what they actually have achieved. And then some of the other things that came out of it too is that as they're exiting, do you want to build advocacy so that people funnel into the space after you? And to what degree do you want to talk about failure? What degree do you want to talk about success? And so through that, you can figure out what is the legacy you want to leave, and then also what's the challenge from there. And we worked with them over the course of a year to figure out what is that sunset going to look like? What are the content you want to create? So the tangibles that come out of that are across of, what's the content strategy, what's the messaging, what's the voice, and a lot of these marketing, branding tools that a lot of people use, but then also what's the ancillary benefit of spending time to really distill down what it is that you actually did do. And then in some ways, creating that space for them to verbally journal and to go through some of the exercises that they might not have gone through since they originally founded the idea in the first place. Right. And then from that, building out, okay, then how do you build a social movement around that? What's the messaging and the story? Knowing that everyone in the impact space is trying to make some form of positive impact, and storytelling helps accelerate that process. And so what is that social movement? And then what are the stories that are going to help perpetuate that?
It's interesting, and storytelling takes so many forms. I was on the board of something called Street Kids International, and one of the fundraising initiatives we did, it was unbelievably cool. I'll just take a minute to tell it, just because it was really amazing. They got children in developing countries who were street affected or street youth to actually draw or color a picture depicting their life, and then they got some of Canada's top photographers to interpret these, because they do a little write-up. The kids would do a little write-up about what it meant. And these photographers went crazy. Like, they were so excited about this initiative. Some of the photography was unbelievably breathtaking, and took this little color drawing and turned it into this magnificent work of art that told a story. There was one kid who just had a dream about, he lived in a garbage dump basically and wanted to achieve something through business. And this photographer got this purple background photographer of this guy on the top of a garbage dump planting a purple flag. It was magnificent. And it was just such a creative way of doing storytelling that impacted the mission of the organization so much more clearly than any talking head could have done.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really,
and also what it does oftentimes is that we're normally working with C-suite on the conception of these ideas and storytelling, and this, you mentioned it before, the notion of human-centered production is, the idea was taking human-centered design thinking and pairing that with the video production process and using narrative to solve challenges. So that's not necessarily a new concept, but what we're trying to do is build a feedback loop from the community that is being affected by the work, and finding mechanisms so that the C-suite can actually listen to that and hear it at the same time. Because you can drive a mission from the top, but if you're not being inclusive, you might be missing a lot of things. And oftentimes that comes back through the process, because we're coming in externally and we get a unique vantage point where, yes, we're talking about concept and big freaking problems in the world, and then the huge problems that the institution has in facing those. And that's what's helping us determine what type of story to tell to who and where. And then from that, we start story mining and mapping what are the potential stories that are going to help build that resonance and connection amongst the community. And then when we go tell these stories, we're going and we're talking with not only the C-suite anymore. Now we're talking with project design, project management, project implementation, and then the community that's being affected, hopefully not disaffected by that work. But sometimes you can find, hey, why do they keep doing this?
Consequences.
And so that we can loop that back, and it can transform the user experience as well, or the community experience. And that's what I think, if you're doing that in a cyclical way and you're constantly undertaking storytelling in this fashion, then you're doing a lot of listening. And from that helps you evolve your mission over time, stay connected to the community that you want to serve, and then also expand that community and accelerate your impact.
So what kind of causes or missions have you played with for clients?
Yeah, so we've done everything. I'll just sort of go through some of the stuff we're working on now. We're doing work in the agriculture sector on responsible recruitment for H-2A visa migrant labor force. That came out of a project that we were doing work on bringing awareness to human trafficking under the H-2A visa process and migrant labor force. So this one in particular, we're doing work in Central America and going down and seeing why, bringing transparency to it, humanizing the people that are responsible for bringing food to our table, literally. And, what's motivating them to leave their home, work long hours, take a job that most Americans would never take, and what are they doing with it? So we went down, spent some time in these communities and have followed a few individuals that have come a couple times. What are they doing with it? How is it transforming their family, and how they're investing in their family and in their community? And then we followed some that have been waiting for 3 years and finally got the job, and then we're going to follow them on the farms. And the differentiator for this organization is to show that they're doing the right thing. And it's sort of sad that doing the right thing in a very responsible way is very different than how most of the food is being sourced through labor. So that's one project. We're doing a lot of work with tribal clean energy. So working on storytelling and visual storytelling around how do you get utility scale renewable energy in Indian country. So we're working with an organization that does a lot of advocacy, does a lot of technical assistance and financial assistance to get these really large projects that unlock some of the Inflation Reduction Act and bipartisan infrastructure law funding for renewable energy and a just transition. And then
there's a group in British Columbia, a First Nations group, and they've just got a big initiative going to put up a huge solar panel farm to replace all the diesel generated power that they've been using to date. And it's a really big initiative, and it's looking to be pretty successful, but pretty bold too.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Some of the projects that are underway, remarkable actually.
So listen, so a lot of people in the production game, that I know anyway, especially video production, started either with a technical or an arts background. But that's not you. You took a pretty unconventional path to get here, right? So can you just share a little bit about your origins in academia and activism and how that transitioned into this?
Yeah, I studied global and international studies and environmental studies in my undergrad, and then dropped my environmental studies right before I was graduating. And this unique opportunity to be a delegate at the UN Summit for Sustainable Development in South Africa. And NGOs always get kicked out of those things because they protest, and journalists don't. So I finagled the press pass as well as an NGO pass. And my goal during that time was that I was an unabashed activist looking at underbelly of globalization, systems of oppression, and international inequity. And all of that content, this is pre-YouTube, this is pre-social media, all of that content was only in obscure academic journals, or maybe really obscure magazines, and most people in the general population had no idea. So the access to information was very limited at that time. And it was paralleling, I was young, and it was paralleling this time where Final Cut Pro was a new program, where suddenly you didn't have to buy this huge computer in order to run an editing system. And the price of video cameras was plummeting just because of innovation. So it was ripe for all these tools to say, well, what if we start to take these creative ways of expressing content that resonate with people? What if we start using that for activism and to help disseminate some of the academic discourse in a way that's actually palatable to people? Most people don't like reading academic literature at all, or the format of it, right?
Because it isn't storytelling.
Exactly. I mean, there are some academics that do it extremely well. My mentor and professor is unique in that capacity. Professor Juergensmeyer, he had ability to write compelling pieces that on very complex issues that became more palatable. And doing that during that time, I started to do it with short form video content, and then as continued, I would bang nails as a carpenter, save up money, maybe write some grants and keep it all together, and then to different areas that were in hypertension, so war zones, post-conflict zones, disaster areas. Sometimes those were overlapped, and started doing research, photojournalism, and video. And I started writing less and less, and started.
Is there a market? Like, just, it's a business podcast too. It's like you're doing short documentaries.
Or maybe I just sucked at the distribution sales side of things. But at that time, there wasn't. I would contact all different news sources and say, hey, I'm trying to do this, and they're like, sweet, good to know. And
nice going, kid.
Yeah, way to go. And yeah, and then what ended up happening was I did have some professors that, a few months after I graduated, that would call me back and say, hey, that's actually the first thing I ever edited. Was one of my professors said, this was on a Wednesday, said, hey, I know that you were at the summit and all this kind of stuff and took footage. Can you come in and show some raw footage on Monday to the class and give a guest lecture? This was in front of his whole class. And so I said, yeah. And then I didn't own a computer at the time, and I had a different mentor down in LA that ran a production house. And so I called him up that day and said, can I come down and borrow your computer and learn how to edit so I can put this thing together? And I did. And then on that Monday, played, and I just grabbed whatever music I wanted to, like a little Lauryn Hill, Ben Harper, like Moby, whatever. But I pieced this thing together, and we gave this guest lecture, and then played the video. And I saw, some people are crying, other people have no idea this is going on. People are coming up after, talking about wanting to change their major or how to get involved in these initiatives. And I just saw right there that there's such power in this type of storytelling. And from that moment on, it just perpetuated. And then it over time, so there was an era that a lot of it will be doing just that, go do a piece, come back, do research, and then run seminars and guest lectures, and then try to put the next project together while informing on these other ones. And over a period of time, there was this pattern that I started seeing where it was blowing people's minds because they hadn't seen this type of content before, but it wasn't paralleled into something that could funnel them right into action, and that action can look at like many different things. It could be, donation, it could be getting directly involved, but it didn't have that funnel. So I started doing work with organizations that that I felt had a high standard of their work. And so what if we could start to use these same techniques that I was using to disseminate what was going on in the world and get people interested in that, in the issues and the people, and understand things from a different frame. What if we could do that same thing for organizations that were doing amazing work? And that's when the idea of Cage-Free Productions came into play. And then I went back to grad school and continued along my academic career. And so I always kept one foot in activism, one in artistry,
Right.
and one in academia for a while.
What I find fascinating about that is I've done a bunch of mentorship at Norman Jewison's Canadian Film Center here in Toronto, and you've gone the exact opposite way that most people do, right? Usually people do fee-for-service video production in the hopes of being able to create their own proprietary content, based on their passions. You went the exact opposite route. You started with your own and then figured out how to turn that into a service offering. Have you observed that in the industry? Like, do you acknowledge that as a atypical way of getting into it?
Yeah, I think it is atypical. I think a lot of people, if they started when they were in an educational institution, I think it allows for a little bit more of that agility of, I was always doing this stuff with my friends, and started doing skate videos or started doing surf videos or whatever it is. And some doing really creative content. But I think that if you're doing it while in an educational institution, you have a little bit more agility because you don't have to pay your bills the same way normally.
Right.
You might be taking out loans at the time, or you might still have a job, as I did, but you have a little bit more flexibility. But then I think what ended up happening was I just saw there was a need, and it was hard and still continues to be. I think it's amazing how fast the social impact space has grown over the last decade. If I went full-time in 2008, it was a very different.
One of the things I'm interested in too, from a business standpoint. So once you went full-time in 2008, and so you're starting to build a business, for your audience, like this is, I find a really interesting distinction, and different people play it very differently. On the one hand, you're a very mission purpose driven organization, and there'll be a very strong appeal to that from the type of customers you're trying to reach out to. On the other hand, there's also, I'm buying a service for a certain amount of dollars, and I got to make sure that, this is actually good quality production. And so from the buyer's perspective, how do they weight those two? Like, a lot of people I've seen, they talk the value side, but then, the dollars speak. Like, how do you view those customers, and in the sales process, which do you emphasize and which do they seem to value the most?
I think they value the most the type of content we're going to create, and is it going to accelerate their service or their offering or their product, because it has to meet the same quality. You can be the same way that you saw when sustainable fashion first started. There was so many potato sack hemp pants, and you're just like, this looks ridiculous. I can't wear this anymore. Yes, I look sustainable, but man, these tired like recycled tire flip-flops are really heavy. You get to a certain point where it needs to be comfortable, and it needs to perform at the same level of standards. They're coming to us for the standard of video production, but pairing that with the knowledge of the social impact sector is what we bring to it. And I think that's something that there are a lot more organizations that do that now than when we first started, and more the merrier, because I think we need a lot of that. But we have to hit that standard on the creative and the visual, because that's what we're competing against as well. So if you have a product out there that's more nefarious in the world versus one that has a positive social impact, and one looks horrible in all of its marketing materials, and the other one looks amazing, shiny, and glitzy. There's always going to be some of that discrepancy, but it's the story that's the differentiator. So you at least have to hit that same quality mark so that they can try to compare them in a different way, because sometimes you are competing against budgets that are way bigger on the more nefarious ones versus the ones that are having a positive social impact. But in the end, if you are trying to sell a product or a service, you want it to look gorgeous, and you want it to hold the same quality as that, because it's their baby, right?
If you do this story right, there's an organization here called Sick Kids Hospital, and a number of years ago, they completely turned the storytelling about that on its head. The traditional thing about sick kids is, look how sick these kids are, and they really need your help, and all this kind of stuff. They turned them into superheroes. They had a whole campaign with them in capes and masks, and flying in the air, and how these kids taking this on were superheroes, and don't you want to support the superhero? It was brilliant. And didn't require a lot of money, but just the repositioning of that narrative was so impactful, because it disrupted everybody's expectations.
Yeah. And a lot of times what we'll do too with the organizations that we're working with is we'll spend a lot of time choosing what is the right story to tell, right? And that's been sort of signed off. And you build checks and balances along the way. But then once you've chosen that authentic story of impact, then we need to unleash that a little bit and untether the controls and speak to the person or the group and say, well, how do you want this story to be told? Where do you want to go? So you start to pull them into that process. And that's also where the human-centered part is in the human-centered production comes from as well. It's not only the human-centered design, but it's also human-centered. So if we're extracting someone's story, right? So let's not be extractive. Let's talk to them, and how do we invest in them the same way that they're investing by sharing the story in whatever organization or product. And
that's the fun part, right? Like that's where you get to be creative and collaborative.
Yeah. And then it's looking at that as a very sacred exchange. You're asking someone to let us into their life for a period of time, and to be vulnerable and willing to answer our questions and take us into their house or into their life. And that needs to be honored. And so then it's how do you want that story to be? And let's make it so that their experience when they walk away from whatever time we spend with them and whatever we create, that they feel invested in, and that they can walk away feeling that they were heard and that their story can have an impact. And so it's making sure that ownership of the story is there as well.
Now, is the challenge, this will be potentially a stereotype-based question, but traditionally people think of, NGOs and nonprofits as having tighter budgets. So what's the business tension on your side between balancing those budgets and hitting that quality level? Or is that a misunderstanding? Because I know there's some large charities who have pretty substantial budgets.
Yeah, and we've worked with that entire range. And I think it is always tricky. And I think one of the things that we've done a lot within the nonprofit and NGO space, and this is also advice for anyone that's starting to do it, is that a lot of it gets put on the overhead of the organization.
Right.
And what we work on our consultant side is, how do you start to move that onto your programmatic side? Realizing that every initiative or any service or any product that nonprofits, NGOs are putting out into the world can be amplified with storytelling and documentation. Sometimes it's for education. Sometimes it's for advocacy purpose. Sometimes it's just internal mechanisms that need to be created, and they're not the most sexy stories to tell, but they can have a great effect on their bottom line, like trainings and frequently asked questions, that kind of stuff. But it's really working with them. How do you start to shift that budget onto the program? So if they have a 5-year grant, it's not a line item. Storytelling was built in as critical to the success of that specific initiative. And then what that does is it allows you to start to build an archive over time that then when you need institutional storytelling, like we have a gala coming up for a 25-year anniversary, or we have a new grant or a new direction we want to go, we need to prove that we have this capacity. Then you're just working on maybe one day of a shoot to build the framework around that piece and the post-production, because you have the archive documenting all this other work on all these other initiatives. So it's really just being strategic. But yeah, they are limited budgets, because I've had a lot of conversations. They're like, well, this equates to, 10,000 meals or whatever. And it's like, yeah, true. And we, at the same time, because we're driven by a mission to make a social impact, we don't want to drain those resources either. So let's be smart on how you're going to use them. Are they going to be more effective? And storytelling is like networking and a lot of these other things that sometimes are hard to quantify the return on investment. Sometimes it's easy. It's like you have a gala, you need this is part of the experience, and that's going to bring it in because everyone's crying. Other times it's like, oh man, someone watched this thing 5 years later and they were touched. Or, you can have, everyone wants a viral video. Sometimes there's millions of views on something and not a cent was donated. Sometimes 10 people saw it and there were millions donated. So it's really trying to figure out what type of story you're trying to tell, who you're trying to tell it to, and where are they?
And you said something I want to highlight, because for anybody who's listening, I think it was sort of buried in what you said, but I think it's super important in terms of choosing a provider. The fact that you are purpose driven. There are some businesses, right, who will say, oh, damn, this client has a tight budget, so somehow I'm going to have to figure it out while still making a margin and all that kind of stuff. But your orientation being, we want to make sure that you as an organization optimize the returns you're generating, because that's part of our mission, creates a higher level of trust with you as a service provider, because there's not a conflict in objectives. There's actually an alignment with those objectives. And that's not the norm in sort of outsourced production services.
Yeah, because the organizations, and this gets into something else now that you brought it up, but the organizations that we work with, that's our supply chain.
Right.
And so if you have an organization that's an agency and they're working with, name the crappy brand that's doing horrible things to the environment or what have you, and then they're taking a premium because they can sell huge creative budgets for some of this stuff. And then they take that and say, okay, now we can offer it 50% off these services to X nonprofit, or 25%. They end up undercutting organizations like us that can't afford to like dip way below, but they're getting a boon on it because they need to donate so much. Or now they even want to go through B Corp sponsored, like B Corp, become a B Corp or something like that, certification. And so for us, we look at that, that's our supply chain. And obviously we all thrive when we're working together. We crumble if not. And this actually came up with an idea, and we were talking about this with a small organization, because as we've grown as well, sometimes it's harder to take, really small projects. But then we're like, okay, let's try to figure out a way that we can do this that works within and meets you with the storytelling that you need to get you to that next space. And one of the things we're working with is, how do we start to look at their supply chain and say, well, if you can't afford our services, what if we start to meet with your whole supply chain, because they probably need storytelling too. And you might be the end product of all these different ingredients and this type of packaging. But what if we talk with all the partners that make your product occur, see what they need from a storytelling perspective, and start to share on different dates? Because if you want to highlight your sustainable packaging, and we have to go and shoot that, well, maybe we talk with the person that runs the sustainable packaging organization and see if they need storytelling, because now you're splitting that day. Right. And then also, if we have, let's say, 7 different organizations across the supply chain that are interested, Well, now we have a distribution strategy too of like-minded, mission-aligned organizations. And now we're able to create a purchasing consortium amongst their different assets. And yeah, they want to show end product, but they might not be able to afford to shoot that end product or go out to some cashew farm. So what if we work together in a way that uplifts everyone and gets them assets they would never be able to get by themselves? So looking at unique ways and models to play with what you have and then amplify.
Yeah, I love the creativity of entrepreneurs. That's awesome. So what's sort of the big, Uber take over the world objective for Cage Free?
Well, I don't want to take over the world. The idea was envisioning a cage-free world. If we take it over, then it's just one big cage. Yeah, I would say for us is just, we're working on awesome projects, and it's just trying to do more of that. I think one of the things that we're starting to see more and more is more people coming into the space, both in social impact, on entrepreneurship side, as well as creative. So I think it's a great time for us. We don't really have, this, we need to hit X amount of employees or X amount of money. For us, it's really, can we effectively amplify other organizations' impact and learn from it? So,
and that's kind of what I get at. I mean, I ask that question in a cheeky way for a reason, but it's, just like, what's the goal? I have a client that their business goal is an impact goal. And they don't talk about revenue. They talk about, we want to remove 1 million tons of waste from the waste stream.
Yeah.
That's and everybody in their organization, they cap that in their metrics. Now that scaffolds up to revenue. But the rallying cry isn't, we're going to hit 5 million in revenue. The rallying cry is, we're going to get 1 million tons of waste out of the waste stream. And we did 500,000. That's awesome. Look at us go.
Yeah. And I think then if for us, I think in many ways, our impact is defined by the impact of our partners. We're that one removed. But I think for us long term, yes, we have other impacts with our work, naturally, negative and positive. But I think for us is, how do we get better at mitigating our negative impacts? And then also, I think that next stage is, how do we share the space to be creative? And not everyone has had the same access and privilege to get to do what we get to do. So I think, how do we build mechanisms and programs that bring in more diverse storytellers from the communities where we're working? How do we amplify their ability to tell their own story and learn share what we've learned along the way as well, and what we continue to learn, and do that in a way that helps amplify other storytellers, I think is sort of next echelon.
Right. And what do you find as a leader of the organization? Like, what are your biggest business challenges? Is it finding people,
it's always
clients?
Yeah. I mean, it's always a cross. There's, yes, we want to scale. We want to scale intentionally. So it's not just to grow and have more headaches. It's how do we create more impact with our work? And, but I think, like everything else is, business is hard, and there's a lot of things going on. There's everything from HR to contract fulfillment. One of the lessons I learned really early on, hard way, was when I first launched, is when, you're out there, you're banging doors and, door-to-door salesman style, trying to get revenue in the door. And then you're like, oh, cool, we got a few projects. And then we're doing some internal work. And we, at that time, was me. And so it was just going. And then you're doing all your contract fulfillment. And then I had to get the website up and get all this other business things going on, and realizing, a few months into that, like, oh, wait, I got to also keep hustling generating new potential clients and things like that. So and you're like, oh, the runway is not that long anymore because we're almost done with these projects. So I think it's really trying to figure out, not how to do more, but really prioritize where I can be most effective in the work, but also what's that ratio of doing the work, like working in the company versus working on the company. And that's always always been the tricky part for me on scale.
Do you have any kind of rhythm of planning?
I would say every summer, there's normally a time where I am able to depart from the nitty gritty in the work. And so that becomes a headspace where I'm doing a lot of horizon scan, landscape, working on the company, and then starting to say, okay, where should we go in the next year? Sort of touching, creating touch points throughout the year to go to that. But I'm not a KPI, OKR person, stuff like that. But it's very, and yeah, our projects are so diverse in their nature anyway. And everyone is their unique little butterfly as much as you try to productize a service and like build it out, and it's like, oh, but this person needs that. And so it ends up being very custom, but there is a process that allows that to flourish and respect that butterfly. So we're not going to just hammer everyone into the same.
Sound like you enjoy it.
Oh, it's awesome.
Yeah. Okay. Last two questions for you. Just two rapid fire ones. What's one personal quality that you most had to overcome to succeed?
I love starting things and building. And in order to be successful, I had to learn how to finish. So that quality of trying to round out what may be exciting, I take a great sense of pride in that finishing, but I was always idea and then build, and then would have tons of 75% projects. So that quality
there's no entrepreneur listening to this that can relate.
Yeah. So learning how to finish, to your point, from a business perspective, had to, because that's how we get the final check. So, it's built into it.
It's also how you have the impact. You can't really have the impact if you don't finish it.
So,
yeah. All right. And then what's the one personal quality that's most responsible for your success? No false humility.
I'm going to take this slightly different notion of perfectionism. So it's, in some ways, it's allowed all the attention to the minute details on it. So being super creative, but then in that finishing, coming down to really polish, and then polish again, and then polish again, so that it's ready. We're the face for other people's initiatives oftentimes. So it better be to the quality that it could be and should be. And I think that perfectionism is also the stifling. So it's almost like that Shakespearean flaw. What has allowed me to get to this point is also what's holding me back from the next level. Right. So learning to let go, I think, of that quality, and realizing that it has its place and time.
Or how do you manifest that quality level without needing you to be the one that's in there reviewing that?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's awesome. So you've been really generous with your time, and this has been really, really interesting. I love the work you're doing, and I wish you continued success. Where can people find you?
cagefreeproductions.com. You can find me on LinkedIn as well. So that's linkedin.com / Paul J. Lynch. But yeah, those are the typical spaces to find us.
Nice. Well, thanks very much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. This was awesome, Warren. And thanks for sharing some of your stories too. We got to learn a little bit more about you, which was awesome.
Right on. Have a good one.
Thank you. You as well.